Welcome to this explainer. I want you to go ahead and completely forget everything you think you know about those golden arches. As a macro strategist looking at global markets, I can tell you right now that McDonald's, well, it looks like a standard fast food company on the surface, but that is merely an illusion. Today, we're diving deep into the financial architecture of what is essentially a sleeping money printer. We're going to deconstruct exactly how this incredibly powerful system operates, backed up by their 2025 financial data. So let's jump right in.
You probably heard this famous adage before. McDonald's is really a real estate company. Now, looking at it from a strict accounting perspective, they aren't literally a real estate investment trust or a REIT. They don't just passively own empty buildings. But as we'll uncover in this explainer, that phrase hits the nail on the head when it comes to their core economics. Harry Sonborn, he was the company's first president, realized super early on that selling burgers was just the starting line. The actual massive wealth, that was buried in the ground right underneath the fryers.
So this brings us to a massive financial mystery. Think about it. If the visible product, the burgers, the fries, the dollar menus is relatively low margin, how on earth did this system generate a staggering $139.4 billion in system-wide sales in 2025? How are they pulling these massive recurring corporate profits out of cheap food? Well, to really understand this, we have to look past the menu board and examine the structural blueprint of the business itself.
The absolute secret to their success boils down to this brilliant three-layer architecture. It's kind of like an iceberg. At the top, we have layer 1, the restaurant interface. Just below the surface is layer 2, the franchise operating layer. And sitting firmly at the very foundation is layer 3, the real estate cash flow layer. Let's unpack exactly how these three layers interact to form what is, frankly, an absolute financial fortress.
Okay, starting with layer 1, the restaurant interface. This is exactly what you and I see when we drive down the street, right? The cheap food, the incredible convenience, the drive-thrus, and that globally recognized brand. But here is the absolute crucial takeaway for our analysis. The burger is just the demand engine. That familiar branding acts as the ultimate consumer traffic magnet. It gets the cars into the parking lot and the people up to the counter. But here's the kicker. Corporate McDonald's actually has zero desire to deal with the messy, day-to-day reality of running most of those kitchens.
And that brings us down to layer 2, the franchise operating layer. This brilliantly shows how McDonald's insulates its own corporate balance sheet. Nearly 95% of McDonald's restaurants are franchised, so the local franchisee absorbs almost all of the store-level risk. They're the ones in the trenches dealing with the grueling reality of local labor shortages, wage pressures, utility bills, the whole shebang. The local operator takes on that immense operational burden, which frees up corporate to just focus on growing the system itself.
Which leads us to layer 3, the real estate cash flow layer.
Now, this is the grand reveal. Just let this number sink in for a second. 84%. In 2025, McDonald's generated an 84% margin on its franchise restaurants. I mean, that is literally unheard of in the traditional restaurant business. Because the franchisee is out there paying for the food costs, paying for the labor, and handling local operations, the revenue that flows back to corporate, mostly in the form of rent and royalties, is incredibly pure, high-margin profit. This right here is where the franchise system completely transcends typical brand licensing and becomes a ruthless, highly efficient rent machine. By controlling the physical land in the buildings, corporate captures the economics of the local restaurant's success, turning high-volume foot traffic into wildly predictable, high-margin revenue streams.
To really put that into perspective, look at this stark financial comparison. When McDonald's operates its own restaurants, its margin is about 15%. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a completely normal, decent restaurant margin. But their franchise margin? 84%. This visually proves exactly why McDonald's wants to be a franchisor and a landlord, not a kitchen manager. Operating a restaurant is really hard work. Operating a financial toll bridge, on the other hand, is incredibly lucrative.
Let's look exactly at how that money flows in. Out of $16.5 billion in total franchised revenue for 2025, check out the massive slice carved out just for rent, $10.4 billion. Royalty is brought in $6 billion, and the initial franchise fees, a tiny $88 million, rent alone represented roughly 63% of their entire franchised revenue. They aren't just taking a cut of the burger sales, they are literally charging the franchisee rent simply to stand on their property and sell those burgers.
And get this rent stream isn't just some day-to-day gamble. At the end of 2025, McDonald's was sitting on $31.4 billion in future gross minimum rent payments due under their existing agreements. Think about that as an absolute bedrock of contracted downside protection. Even if store sales fluctuate, this massive schedule of minimum rent guarantees a baseline of cash flow straight back to corporate headquarters.
Now, if you want concrete proof that this real estate thesis is legit, just look at their balance sheet. Out of $28.2 billion in total net property and equipment in 2025, a staggering $22.8 billion was tied up under franchise arrangements. And that includes $7.1 billion purely in land underneath those franchises. They own the most valuable corners, intersections, and drive-thrus on the entire planet. This rent thesis is backed by a very real, very massive physical footprint.
Which brings us to our next core concept. Site control is strategic control.
Owning the dirt beneath the fryers, that is the ultimate form of corporate leverage. It's the power of the land. Because McDonald's is the actual landlord, they can ruthlessly enforce brand standards and guarantee that a global network of independent operators marches to the exact same beat. If an operator decides they won't comply, simple. Corporate can just refuse to renew the lease. They control network density, so locations don't cannibalize each other's sales, and crucially, they can actually force franchisees to undertake incredibly expensive strategic upgrades, like putting in those digital kiosks or remodeling the drive-thrus, all because corporate holds the keys to the property.
Now, let's pivot and look at 2027 growth targets and hidden vulnerabilities.
Look, the machine is highly optimized today for sure, but no macro model is entirely immune to friction. First, let's look at the growth ambition. 50,000. That is the aggressive corporate target for global unit count by the end of 2027. McDonald's is pushing hard to expand its footprint because more units mean more franchise agreements, a much wider royalty base, and a lot more real estate to extract rent from. It's an aggressive scaling of that three-layer architecture we just walked through.
And they are totally supercharging this physical expansion with data. By 2025, they had 210 million active loyalty users. Now, what's vital to grasp here is that this digital engagement doesn't replace their real estate model. Actually, it acts as a massive demand multiplier. The app and the loyalty programs drive up visit frequency and the average check size. And that, in turn, makes every single physical node, every single restaurant, more productive. Higher sales simply mean higher percentage-based rent and royalties flowing back to corporate.
But there's always a catch, right? And here, it's franchisee health. This is the systemic, hidden variable of the whole operation. The entire rent machine relies on the franchisee actually making enough money at the store level to survive. Operators have to maintain their own profitability so they can afford to reinvest, pay their staff, do the remodels, and expand. If the local operator goes broke, well, the corporate rent and royalty streams start to fracture.
And right now, those franchisees are feeling the squeeze from some severe systemic pressure points. Wage and commodity inflation are driving local operating costs through the roof. At the exact same time, consumers are out there demanding value menu pricing, which heavily limits how much the franchisee can actually raise their prices. Add in the debt from those corporate-mandated remodels and the totally margin-crushing fees from third-party delivery apps, and you've got a really dangerous gap forming between corporate strength and franchisee reality.
So, to bring this explainer full circle, it really all comes back to one core truth. The burger sells the visit, but the site captures the economics. That perfectly encapsulates the elegant yet entirely ruthless brilliance of the McDonald's business model. They've somehow managed to separate the messy, low-margin business of making food from the pristine, high-margin business of collecting rent, all while using the first to fuel the second.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away from today's analysis. As operational costs continue to surge globally, can this 84% margin rent machine actually keep squeezing profits out of the system without eventually breaking the back of the franchisees who power the whole thing? It is an incredibly delicate financial balance, and how McDonald's manages that exact tension will undoubtedly define its next decade. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on the hidden architecture of a fast food empire.